wonderful. So initially when we started hiring or decided that we should and can hire, in just the baby step, we never had an office. I used to work out of my house. So I realized that people will need to work virtually. And we just kind of sold the concept of virtual internships. And we had no money to offer, but we just put it out, and we were surprised by the number of applications that came in, because people just want to be and are excited to be a part of something that is bigger than themselves. So we started like that, and then hiring was a little bit of a struggle in the middle because it's an all women kitchen, and there are not a lot of experienced women in the F&B space. Usually you have to train them from scratch. But most recently, when we put out a hiring post last week, maybe because of the situation, maybe because we have grown, a combination of many factors, but we had more applications than we've ever had in the past 2.5 years. So yeah, so I guess that's my experience.
So as an HR services company, and when you're providing manpower, I think a lot of times what we try and do is we try and look at leads from a very unidimensional approach. But a lot of times what can happen really well and crack what you do is your content. And this is true for any business. If you're going to be able to address the top 5 problems of the person you want the lead of, and this person can become a collective group of people that you want leads from, automatically you start addressing those problems and creating content which is specific to them and their needs. You'll realize you get a lot more leads, because a lot of times leads are a shoot in the dark. And when you shoot in the dark, you're not knowing exactly where you're going. So a lot of times reversing the whole problem helps. And when you're reversing the problem, you're looking at it from their point of view. So the easiest thing to do is to look at the person. Like, for instance, Meghna's issue as an employer was finding the right talent for her industry. So if somebody was writing a piece on finding and hiring and training the right talent for the F&B services industry and talking about inclusion and talking about women there, you would have hit the nail on the head with somebody like Meghna, who was looking for talent like that. So, Sandhya?
It's a bit different in the education sector, I guess. So there are two things when it comes to hiring in education space. And if we're looking, I'm understanding that's the question related to, like, where do you find the right people? So uh, as an organization, the organization that I run, I go by the philosophy of no hiring and no firing. So like I said, Teachers Inc. is more an idea than an organization. And what we believe will help people in the space is when you take people, see what they can contribute, pay them for their contribution, and then let them go. So they're not tied to me in any way, right? They're not bound by walls, bound by time. They can do what they want. We don't have worries about, oh, what will happen to my content. We don't care. It's education, and copyright is right to copy. It's I've made it that way because I felt that teachers or educators need opportunities, especially those who want to do something very different in the education space. You can't bind them and say, work for me from 9 to 5, and then, I'll pay you an X amount, which may be enough, which may not be enough. So to spare myself, all the problems that come with hiring people, I decided I'll do something like, let me, find people who are really, really good. And somehow those people get connected because of the network. And then I say, okay, if you have something to offer, you work with me and we will give you the lion's share if the content is yours, and you can be happy. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is hiring in schools. And that becomes very difficult because we're looking at educators. Now, if I start talking about it, it's going to be endless. But there is an issue of finding very, very insightful or passionate educators. It is a challenge, I think, in a lot of fields. So what we do is in the current school that I'm consulting and where I had to hire teachers, and it was a unique school. It is a unique school that I'm looking at. We had to have a rigorous process. Of course, you find teachers not through. We tried finding teachers through portals like Naukri, other thing. And we didn't find what we wanted. In fact, in the first lot, I had to reject every single person. So we changed tactics and we looked at who are the people we know. How do you get to the right people through the work they have done, through knowledge of the work that they've done. So it helped for me being in training field. I've met thousands and thousands of teachers, so I already have some idea of who would fit. And that's how I found a very, very solid group of people who are great on their knowledge, skills and dispositions and will be the right fit. So I think that is the bottom line. One is, do you want to hire? What is it that you want to hire people for? And second is, how do you find the right people? The right people will come to you only if you have a rigorous process for choosing them. So that's what I do. And
yeah, you see, so now for an HR services company, here are two perfect examples of employers who are looking for talent and not finding it. So, can you address that problem? And then you'll perhaps, get those leads that you want, because clearly that's not being addressed. And both of them, there are four of us on this call. We all know that talent is a big problem. So address
it is.
And address that problem by industry.
Yeah. I think it's about creating a process where the right people will come in. Maybe it's a wrong example, but you design a web and you make sure that the right person falls in. But sorry about if it sounds offensive to some people, but no. The point is, there are people who want to do good things, who want to, there are people out there. It's just that we do not have the right processes to get them. We don't have the right platforms, and it has been challenging even for us, while I say, but when you think about it and when you design a process, for example, you have you have a round where people talk to each other, for example, corporates do it a lot, but in education sector, it is particularly challenging because not many people, even if they apply, very few people, can get through an exercise like this, because understanding concepts is a challenge. In fact, the teachers that have already joined us, they tell us that, my God, what is this? We've never been to any interview which was so rigorous and, so difficult. So, but that's what it is. We're looking for the best. So it's okay to be slow. We're not in a hurry. But when we want to find the right people. So as long as you know who you want and what kind of people you want, because there are people, I want teachers. So even if, people, wake up in the morning, some women, let me work, I want to kill time, so let me walk into school. And there are people who get jobs, right? So that's one way of looking at it. And well, there is a market for people like that also. But when you are creating something that carries quality, when you're creating something that carries a very, very different mark, then you can't just have anybody in your team. You have to be careful about the kind of people you choose, and then you have to create processes to get those.
Yeah, even on the corporate side. So if you segment it, let's call it the entry level, let's call it the mid management level within the white collar jobs, and then let's have a separate bucket for your blue collar jobs.
Yeah.
Some of those things, addressing the white collar job scene first in the mid management level, and because I have been as part of both my roles, I have really struggled to find great people. Now, some of the things that really helped me find, and I think as an extension would help the HR services companies also, would be one, a very solid referral program. Now, referral program really works because there are there's a person whose reputation is on the line because he or she is referring. B, there's this other person that is more invested in the whole thing and will be more capable because comes in via contacts and also has someone in the system that he or she is more close to. So hence the whole invested angle. So referrals have really worked. The other thing that I have seen has worked, probably in the mid-management or the entry-level profile, is using services like Frapp. Now, what Frapp does is very interesting. What they do is that they create internships. They go and reach out to a lot of tier 2, tier 3 colleges across India and create these internships, which are probably a 1-day job or a 2-day job. Now, this way, let's say I'm company X and I need someone. During the process of that internship, no matter how short duration it is, I get to know the capability,
Correct, correct.
capability of this person.
Yeah.
One thing that
Yeah.
I've
That's a very good idea, in fact.
yeah. So Frapp, in fact, they got funded last year or something like that, and they've been doing well. They are the likes of Swiggy and all on their customer portfolio.
There are multiple platforms like that.
Yeah, yeah.
There's Internshala,
Internshala and all, yeah. So the third thing that is not relevant across most companies, but some who can really do it, and it's different from an internship, is what I call a fellowship. So as a fellow, you get to shadow those people. Again, the core objective or the mission that you're trying to achieve is same, but the approach is slightly different. So that becomes for the entry/mid management level of on the corporate side. For the blue collar side, you have a lot of other things. For example, I'm not sure if you know this organization called Quest Alliance. It's a non-profit organization. So what they do is that they take people, essentially bottom of the pyramid folks, and then train them. And this becomes a constant pipeline into the likes of e-commerce, delivery, retail folks, automotive sectors, etc. So this is one thing that has really caught on. It's working really well. I'm not sure, but the likes of Vahan and all are also trying to move along the same line. So yeah, these are some of those things which are not the typical Naukri.com, but something new that's happening, but happening really well.
Yeah, so if
That's
you want to
interesting.
get the person who's the decision maker's attention, you need to basically understand that you're sitting right in the middle. As somebody who's providing HR services and providing manpower, you need to also remember you have two sides to the coin. You have the people. You can't ignore the segment of people that need to be also dressed and readied for jobs and just look out for leads, because if you don't have a great talent pool, you're not going to be able to get the eyeballs of the decision maker. So it's both ways. So when you're looking at it from a mid segment point of view, saying I have access to both, a lot of times the company mistakes that companies often make is they're only looking at the people where the revenue is coming from, not the people which actually bring them the revenue. So it's a nice bridge of that gap that exists. And if you can be that gap bridger, then automatically your leads will improve.
All right, guys. So moving to the next question. This question is pretty close to me. How to gauge the level of interest in investing in non-essential services during these times? Manisha Umashankar has asked this question.
Shavani, maybe you can
You
respond to it
we'll
since
take it.
So while it's very close to me, also it's not a good time on the investment front. And I'm not going to sugarcoat my words. I mean, investments in the non-essential sectors are seeing and will, for some of the foreseeable future, continue to see some tough times until the new normal really stabilizes or the old normal comes back. I'm sorry for using those phrases because they've been abused so much by now. But yeah. So if you, for instance, if you look on I'm going to segment into B2B and B2C. If you look at B2B, let's take SaaS companies, for example. Now, within SaaS companies this year, since COVID has started, the field in general is that your investments towards vertical SaaS that is playing more on the non-essential side, let's take restaurant or leisure or travel, they are not being able to raise funding unless it's a very, very specific problem that they are solving, which will be extremely useful in the post-COVID world. So I think today only I was reading about this travel SaaS, vertical SaaS, India-based, that just raised funding from Avtar. And it's because the product that they have is going to be extremely useful in the post-COVID world. However, that said, you do have your horizontal SaaS which are still continuing to raise, and that's because they are playing in a particular, something like a CRM or a sales automation, which is going to lead to a lot of either top line or bottom line inefficiencies, which everyone is really looking for at this moment. Now switch over to the B2C side, on the consumer tech side, that's closer to me, the consumer tech side. Investments again on the essential services and products are definitely on the higher side comparatively. But that doesn't mean that it's only during the in COVID season. So what's key here is to visualize the post-COVID world. Now, there are so many examples that you're seeing coming in. Take CureFit, for example. Cult centers shut down. But then what did CureFit do? They started a host of digital services which are actually addressing a very core problem of remaining healthy, thereby increasing your immunity, be it in the form of physical fitness or the kind of food you eat, or your emotional well-being, or teleconsultation with doctors. So they were very quick to pivot. Now, that is what something catches the eye of the investor if they are focusing on a market which is post-COVID also. Now, if you look at Bounce, for example, Bounce was playing in your A to B commute, but then what they realized was that during COVID, A, obviously your transportation scene is well non-existent for all practical purposes, the shared mobility scene, and B, people don't like changing the asset so quickly. So what it led to was them coming up with the whole rental model, which you see that even the likes of Uber and all have really started marketing on. So taking that positioning and creating for a post-COVID world, while you are a non-essential service, becomes the key thing to do right now, in my opinion. So
I
something
think
that will never raise investments. It's not going to.
essential and non-essential will also, I think, get redefined in the sense that it's not
Exactly.
just vegetable which is essential. We are partners with the company that used to do event management, and we used to supply cakes to them. Now they just, like you said, they pivoted into making a surprise box, and they are getting more number of orders or bookings for that than they used to get for events. Right, so being able to surprise someone and deliver that emotion is still now essential, more essential than it ever was before.
I think the central construct to looking at this as an investment is three things. One is to understand what is your investment slash risk personality and understanding what are those businesses that fit into it. Two is also understanding what businesses that you have perhaps picked are actually aligning to the new normal and have made changes and, directionally move towards something that's going to be a stronger tomorrow versus sitting there and saying, not knowing, we don't know what to do. And of course, the third thing is to always look at each aspect of the investment with a microscopic view to see why do you want to go back to the why, what, when, where, how questions and see how that's going to be in 1 year from now. Put it down on paper and do a compare contrast from that bucket of, the choices that you've picked. And then you'll perhaps get the answer to that when you've actually looked at it in some form in a more organized way or an organized manner. IBNI, for instance, similar to the examples that you guys are giving, is one of the resorts that I'm on the advisory board of, and they're in Coorg. And Coorg currently is flooded, and there are monsoons going on. And because of this, they've been shut for several months. But the same thing, they focused on the good things. You get away, you get to work from a vacation. So work vacays, as they're called right now. And then they said, we'll focus on immunity, we'll focus on health, because they do farm to fork and produce to plate and things like that. So they said, come to us for a week and we'll send you back ready to go back into the chaotic COVID world. So, it's how you build your dynamic to shift with the times that'll actually bring out those companies that are doing something differently. And this is true for any point in time, right? It's not just because of the new normal. Yeah.
I just don't know what to say, because this is investment is not really my game. But I think there was a time when I started wondering whether education is an essential or a non-essential. Big question. So we have been in the dilemma. But I guess it's an evergreen industry, because whether you're rich or poor, whether you have the pandemic or no pandemic, learning has to go on. But how do you define that learning and how do you reimagine it? I think that's where the investments may make sense. Like personally, I've been trying to see how to create a platform to bring the teachers together. And while initially it seemed like it's a big struggle. How do I get people to be interested in a concept like that? I'm not sure yet, but I think it is something that probably now I should start looking. There could be, that could be something it's not just investment in terms of generating business, but it is an investment for social impact, and social transformation. So even things like, how do we address issues like pandemic? We are not educated for it. And I would say it would be a good thing to now look into things like this, we get educated for the real world. And I would really like to equip teachers to do something like this. And my struggle is to bring teachers together. So maybe, one of these days somebody might be interested and I'd like to talk to them.
Sanjay, you are sitting on a gold mine at this time with
I know, please.
bracket
That's
of
why, Shravani, I want to talk to you.
We're going to connect after this one.
I remember A, B, C, D, E are Evertime businesses. Alcohol, babies, children. D was something to do with food and education. We clearly have education and food on this panel right now. So
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I think B was also Bhagwan, God, never goes out.
Yeah, I see. I think I will bring the two together. G and E.
Thanks, guys. Moving to the next question. So this has been asked by Akashdeep Sharma. What's been your biggest challenge in the COVID-19 era, and how have you handled it, or how are you currently handling it?
May I? I mean,
Please.
Go ahead, Tanya.
I think I had a challenge before COVID-19. So, what happened was, initially our reach, for example, in education, and specifically, if I have to, I'm not talking about working with schools or working with children. I'm talking about working with teachers. One of the most difficult things to do, uphill task. And the only way to reach teachers or educators was through schools, because schools decided what the teachers should be trained in or not, which is absurd, actually, honestly. But that's how it has been, and that's how, we were limited in the terms that a school, we had to go talk to a school, make sure they're convinced, and so on and so forth, and then we would get a bunch of teachers to help. Now, what happened in the COVID situation is all teachers had to overnight take to technology, and everybody struggled. It was really a big problem for teachers. Uh, so from, suddenly all the teachers started taking personal interest in learning. "Hey, bhai, mujhe yahan nahi rehna. I want to get better." And we found that suddenly we are getting requests for training and requests for, of course, I don't think like I said, we are in my very first line, in the on the website where we describe the business. We say ours is a business for love. So I'm doing it not really for the money. Of course, if I make money, I'll be very happy. I would love to. But the primary reason is not money, but to get the teacher interested in herself, you know. And the COVID situation actually provided the perfect context for the teacher to say, okay, nobody's going to help me, become good at technology or doing lessons online. So I need to do it myself. And that's when, when it came to her doors, when the problem came to the teacher's doors, that's when, people said, okay, I need to take initiative. And that has helped us, to some extent. And we've been doing some online training and workshop. Now, the challenge is to keep it, see, when we do offline workshop, it's full of energy. To replicate that energy online is not only challenging, it is a humongous task, because there are ideas you need to convey, and you have to convey it in a manner that is palatable for people like teachers. Um, but it has worked out really well, thankfully. We did manage to do a good part of engagement intellectually with the teachers, and and it has been a lot of word of mouth also for us. So people do get interested. So I guess COVID-19 has been a trigger, and I hope that it continues to trigger people, post COVID times as well. I'm just keeping my fingers crossed. And of course, like, I'm not all there. I need help to, make myself, run a little more and get more people interested in the same.
I think I'd say the answer to this question is very connected to the previous question, which is we were
Yeah.
looking at investments. But
Yeah.
if you have to look at businesses, I
Yeah.
think all businesses have the same challenge of reinventing themselves to be
Yeah.
meaningful and to make themselves remembered and stay in the memory of their consumers,
Yeah,
of their consumer
absolutely.
bases. To relook at services, to relook at products, to relook at experiences collectively. So I think that is the challenge that most businesses faced. And how do you overcome it? Communicate. You can never, have scounding behavior when it comes to talking about the business, when it comes to talking about efforts that you're taking as a business to ensure that you stay relevant.
Yeah.
So I think that has been a big problem that most businesses have grappled with in the last 6
Yeah,
months.
I agree. See, in this field, one of the challenges I've had is the COVID times. Suddenly, every single person is a trainer. Like everybody's training, right from people at home to corporate. Everyone wants to train teachers, and I'm like, who are these people? What? Are they? So,
True.
so it is challenging to go through and navigate through that whole plethora. So choices for teachers become very difficult. Like how do I decide what to take and what not to? Who is authentic and who is not? That's a challenge
Yeah.
for somebody like me.
Yeah. Okay, do we want to move to the next, or should I answer this? I'm not sure.
Yes.
You are one of the most relevant people here to answer this question.
Answer this, because as a business, you're a person who's been struggling, struggling with the new normal.
Yeah. So I mean, there were three sides. Luckily, I used to wonder that we were getting revenue from three different streams, and should we just focus on one and do one well? So we were getting from retail, we were getting from corporate, and then I was also doing workshops. But luckily, because we had our hands in all three places, because corporate completely shut, now people don't have budgets to celebrate anymore. On physical workshops completely shut, and online workshops just don't give you the same kind of revenue. So our retail business, all of the dependence was suddenly shifted to this one stream. And while of course we were closed for 1.5 months and there was nothing that we can do about it, but after we opened, it became very important to just shift all of that dependence to this one stream, launch a website, do everything we can to quickly better this. And luckily we've seen this portion has started growing, and we were also lucky that our customers always had this trust with us, because we had a very one-on-one relationship with each and every one of them. So there was never a question of, oh, are you following safety measures, are you hygienic? Because it was like, okay, it's like it's coming from our own kitchen, right? So I'm so grateful that I spent so much time on the phone with every single customer that I used to complain about before. But now all of that investment is really paying off. So yeah, that's how we.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I think one of the ways to ensure that people remember you is how you have worked with
Interact.
them. What kind of rapport you have with them and what kind of quality you have delivered earlier. I think
Yeah, because what happens, what I tell everybody who joins us or is with us is that when someone picks up the phone and calls a Just Bake or any other retail bakery, they know a sales boy or a cashier or a counter girl is going to pick up. They're just going to give them 1 to 10 designs, choose something, we'll have it ready. They have no idea who they're interacting with or anything. In our case, the only thing, the defining edge we have against these guys is our personal touch that we can offer. And what we are trying to see now is how can we scale that personal touch from one.
That's true. That is the challenge. Yeah.
So yeah.
So one example that comes to my mind when you talk about personal touch is, I'm not sure how many of you guys are from the area of Bangalore that I am in, but there's this place called Colombo Idli House. Now what they do is, it's a very highly rated restaurant on both Swiggy and Zomato. And what they do is, with every order, they send a slip, a handwritten note by the co-founder.
Yeah.
And every single time. So I really like that.
Oh, wow.
There has been no.
That's a lot of notes. Yeah.
And that is something, while they did shut down for a brief bit during COVID, because managing your operational monthly expenses and seeing not enough revenue coming to support that does lead to such calls. But then once they started, again, this whole personal touch was back. And because of this personal touch, I am personally less wary of ordering from there on the safety front because of COVID at least.
Yeah.
That's again, but the point that Meghna said is very crucial. How do you scale it? What is the customer
That is
support
the
that
thing.
you have
That's the thing.
to scale this whole thing? How would you, if you look at the likes of Uber, Ola, they've all done away with in-person customer support. They're using bots and algorithms that are there in place as per a structured tree of sorts to help you with coming to whatever question, whatever resolution you need. But that leaves a lot of room for a lot of disgruntlement from the user's point of view. How do you do what Meghna is doing at, let's say, 40, 50 locations? And that's
Operational efficiency.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
You know, you reduce your number of issues that could probably come out of not delivering right, because that's when you start plugging in that little segment of saying, if I cannot be everywhere, how do I scale? Two things. One is you hire people as passionate and as invested in the business as you, and of course train the ones that are perhaps not emotionally invested to at least adhere to protocols and standard operating procedures, which will ensure the best kind of delivery that you can provide.
So one of the things we have, like Shravani said about the handwritten note, whether I'm in the kitchen or not, I let whoever is in the kitchen, whichever chef, to know that write this and sign off as Meghna. You know, in Zomato, you can see which order it is. You can't see, unfortunately, the person's number. They don't give you that access. But I can see it's a 12th order of cupcakes from X person. So I will say, hey, thank you so much for your 12th order. Here's an extra cookie because we love celebrating with you, whatever. So
this is where technology will come in. If you can have, and at least until I was there in food tech, it was not there, and this is something I really needed, was that if you can have some sort of a tool that connects both, and you can automatically change your invoice and your order and include that extra cookie. It's just a button basically that you said, yes, I want to. And the rest of it is just automated. That becomes a very delightful experience. So, or as at Kyofit, we used to call it a 5x4 experience.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the next question, guys. Okay. And a word, that's it. So Mark has asked it, but I think you'll understand the meaning. So Mark wants to know more about B2B marketing, and I'm guessing the best practices currently that prevail.
Again, B2B marketing, I think I'll take that because we're a business to business company. And what I think a lot of times people make the mistake of doing is thinking that a business to business segment doesn't involve human interfacing. You're wrong, because it's the same consumer who's buying from a Zomato and an Uber and everybody who's sitting at the other end of the table where the decision's being made, right? So a lot of times the problems that you're trying to solve for the business, while the approach may be different in terms of dynamic, the way you communicate with them is also of actually solving their problems, the same way you approach it. So from a B2B marketing standpoint, I think in the current times, what has changed is really the dynamics of the business and how it's shifting. So some traditional businesses which are still relevant continue to, urge forward and, move with the times. Whereas some of the businesses that are really badly hit are currently struggling to find that space and sort of navigate this entire marketing angle. But like I said, if you stop communicating, then if there's radio silence from you, people forget you. In the cluttered world that we live in today, if you stop communicating, you'll be forgotten faster than you can think of. So
to actually add to that, so B2B marketing is people, while they'd like to say the B2C segment is more dynamic because obviously you've got a more less homogeneous crowd, you've got more cohorts of customers, and it's very microscopic in nature. But on the B2C, on the B2B side, as I was talking before, the whole product-led growth angle has changed a lot of businesses, at least on the tech side. Now, what it means is that you are not letting your sales or marketing team run with it without having product democratize all of those functions. So when I say product democratize those functions, what I mean is that A, your product needs to be highly differentiated. B, the positioning should be great. C, you should be using and leveraging data that your product is generating on your front, of course, to ensure the right enablement for your sales and marketing. Now, up until now, what B2B has followed is primarily two approaches. Now, one is your inside sales and the other is your outside sales. On the inside sales, of course, it's much different from telemarketing because, unlike telemarketing, it doesn't, a lead does not die with a single phone call. It's a continuous process of relationship building. It's become even more relevant right now because inside sales is pretty much remote sales, right? And currently with COVID and social distancing and you not being able to step out, it makes a lot of sense. Having a very strong inside sales engine with the right performance marketing, especially if you're trying to cater to the SMB side as a B2B player, is very critical. Coming to the outside sales, I think it's going to change very soon where most of it is going to be inside because, well, it is difficult to move around also. And just the fact that right now getting cold leads is more difficult than converting those people who've already shown that first step, who've already taken that first step of TTV. TTV in B2B is essentially time to value. Basically, that aha moment that they got, that's when you start approaching them. Hence, it becomes inside sales. So yeah, these are some of the things that are happening. But if you want to be in the new world, if you want to be making the absolute right decisions which are going to wow your customers, because at the end of the day, it is you being customer centric. It has to be a product led growth for B2B.
Yeah. I'm just, I'm just thinking. I don't have a solution to that question, but I have probably a bigger question. In industries like ours, where we run on ideas, and it's about selling an idea and selling a service. Probably the the equation is very complex. That means, like I am a business, and probably a school is also a business. So I go to a school, but the consumers are completely different people.
B2B to C.
Right? So it is very difficult. So the thing is, somebody is buying and somebody is consuming. It's a completely different ballgame. And besides that, to add to the problem, is you don't see the results immediately. The results is something that will happen over a period of time, over a period of continuous and ongoing engagement with that group. So in situations like this, I really don't know, how to define it. Probably one of you will have better ways of explaining it or understanding it, or what's the phenomena like. So, but just I thought I'll place that perspective that some of them are not as immediate as many of the other products that are outside on in the market.
Yeah.
In the what you're referring to is a B2B to C model, where
Correct.
mostly the first B loses sight of what's happening with the C in the whole play, and that's what and just getting maintaining that real time or near time, a quick understanding between the two is not exactly quick. You have multiple processes, you have multiple barriers. The B might not want you to interact much with the C.
That is true.
Which might be the case in your situation.
Yeah, very much, yes.
Interestingly enough, all B2B companies are B2B2C companies.
Yeah, you might have had as many B's before, but the eventual part would be a C.
Yeah.
Right? So
That's a very tricky, at least in the education sector, it's very tricky because the everything is intangible. It's not a tangible thing that you're giving people. Like people can't say, "Oh, I got this, idea on differentiation, and now my life has changed." It doesn't happen that way. It's like over a period of time, and also the way the idea is received by people also plays a role. And in a group of 30 people, each one understands the concept differently. So to define a product or to define a client is very difficult in a scene like this, in a sector like this.
this requires continuous effort to have
Yeah, absolutely,
a very
absolutely.
good idea of who
Yeah,
your end consumer is and what does that end consumer want. It's a
yeah,
very continuous process. It's
And
not.
also, this question is a little bit of a difficult one to address because it's not a question really. It's just
Mm.
B2B marketing. So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
like an
One has
entire
to do and
subject
one
that
not.
we study,
yeah.
So
Well, let's study.
All right. So we have our next
there's
question.
the educator.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm learner. I think the best definition of an educator is a learner, and I'm always ready to learn.
So, guys, moving to the next question. So this question is it's from Gopala Krishna. How to make larger market reach during the COVID situation? Who wants to go first?
Online, I think everybody's going online. That's the answer. How do you reach more people? Yeah, I think that consistently putting out content because people are consuming content more than ever before, and also recognizing what type of content works for you, even if it's just one platform. If it's Instagram, suddenly there's Reels, suddenly there's Stories, IGTV, there are posts. There's so much different, so many options and so many formats. So yeah, just engaging with the user constantly, reminding them that you're there. Like Shreya said, you have to keep communicating, otherwise they'll forget you.
Also remember that you perhaps know your consumer the best, right? You know who is buying from you. Like Meghna said, she knows exactly, she may not know their number, she may not know them by name, but she knows at the end who is this persona who's sitting behind the screen and actually making that order or deciding or taking that call to get this to them. So a lot of times it's insight that will drive you, an instinct based on that insight, which is going to tell you what kind of conversations you need to generate, what kind of engagement you want to create, what kind of hashtags you want to roll out. Because obviously, let's face it, today everything's happening online, right? So how do you make that experience slightly more, like you said, the event company that's ordering surprise gift hampers for people who are probably signing up for events, and you get like a hamper. How do you then personalize content which is relevant to your user and add value and build it to become an experience? So you go from customer experience to customer delight, satisfaction to delight. How do you make that journey? And every step of the way, from your production to your delivery to your communications, how can you reinvent and redefine the mechanics of these things so you can actually access so that's how you, I think, work today to ensure that you're giving that experience which is like full blown.
To add to that, one of the things that we did when we were closed for 1.5 months, even though it was completely not related to our business, we said, okay, we're shut, we still have expenses, we just need to raise money. So we're going to play housey, and we're going to play housey with all our consumers. And we actually had about 160 tickets that were sold, and everybody was on a WhatsApp group, and it was so much fun and so engaging, and everyone said, okay, let's do it again. So we sell cakes for a living, right? We don't do this, but we were out there saying, hey, we're still around, wait for us, we want to be in touch with you.
Good idea.
Sandhya, how do you do that as an educator?
During COVID times, you mean?
Yes.
I just put out interesting content in the sense, see, for me, it's about getting teachers interested in one, their own growth, and the kind of titles I put out, for, I make sure that it is relevant to something, a problem that they're facing right now. For example, a lot of teachers tell us that, it's all online, children are on the screen. So how do we ensure collaboration happens, or how do we ensure group discussion happens? So what we do is we have a module which incorporates group discussions and on an online platform. So we demonstrate it, and then that's how the people realize, oh my God, we didn't know this, and we could still have a feeling of working together, a feeling of so that's what I do. It's all in the design of the modules for me. So I guess that would apply to products as well. If it is relevant, I make sure it is authentic content. It's research based. It's not some, fluffy thing. Yeah, it's not just a sham of activities put together to make teachers jump around. It's not that. It's serious content, but presented in a very, very realistic, relevant manner. And that is what I think appeals to teachers. That's what they come after. So I may not have a very big crowd, thronging to my thing, but the ones who come, they know they're getting value for money. Second thing is, I make it affordable because I'm working with a section of society that is not really, high on pay scales. So if teachers have to, sign up for a workshop, it means to take away something from their salary. And when I talk to teachers, initially in my trainings, when I said, if I would tell them, what would you do with the spare 500? They would say, oh, we'll buy something for our children, or we'll do something for the family. Nobody says I will use it to buy a book for myself, or in my own professional growth. So you see, for the teachers, which are largely women, their first concern is what is important for their family. So when when I monetize my programs, I have to be very careful about how I do it. So I make sure that, even if the teacher is earning, say, 12,000 rupees, that's the reality. Many teachers earn that much money, for a month of work. And so if she had to take even 500 out of that 12,000, it's a difficult decision for her. So I have to keep that in mind as well. So I make it affordable. I make it, relevant to the things that the teacher is going through right now, and I make it very, very interesting. And okay, so that's what I do to make sure, yeah.
Just to play devil's advocate, or rather the careful, the really cautious person, I'd like to bring in another angle, which probably the asker, the person who's posted the question is not looking for, but that's something to bear in mind when you are thinking about reaching out to a larger base, especially at this time, is that do not forget your P&L. Absolutely do not forget, because in a bid to reach to a larger base, you might be not focusing on people who actually are going to convert, and ROI is very important. You are spending X dollars or X rupees on something, you really want that outcome to come out of it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I'll give you some examples. So basically what I'm trying to say is that a very targeted approach in identifying who your customer base would be or could prove better in the long run than doing the spray and pray model, just reaching out to everyone. And that is where you need to keep your finances, and you need to always go back and look at your books and see how much money do I have, how do I spend wisely. For example, let's say if you are a new standalone SMB, and when I give these examples, I'll keep it to the B2C side. So if you're a new standalone SMB in this climate, I would advise against going on a spray and pray larger base. What I would say is that use your money, use your budget, use your time at this moment to figure out the right PML, the right product market fit, because that is what will eventually, you don't want the month of August or September to be sky high in revenue and then just fall flat, right? Because you really marketed all over, got whatever you could, but then you could not build a customer base, a sustainable customer base. So look at if you're a new SMB, look at your product market fit, look at the customer experience you're building, look at how can you really amplify the word of mouth that is being generated. That's one. Now, on the other hand, if you are, let's say, a part of an overall business, let's say a vertical within a business, and which is a B2C business, let's say an app-led business, you might already be getting a lot of top of funnel. Instead of spending your dollars on going towards a broader base, you might instead want to market yourself to increase the conversion funnel of that top that's already coming in, A. B, to increase the retention rate of these people by, again, following or rather giving a stellar customer experience. Now, on the other hand, if you are an existing standalone player, SMB player, this is when I'd say know your customer. It is so important to just know your customer, target them, personalize the communication. If you are targeting, let's say, a weight loss program, do not go and do not ask your CRM team to go and send it to half of India, because that's just a cost. That will not result in anything. Figure out how do you identify what segment of those people in your database are falling in that BMI that might actually benefit from it. What is the gender balance between the kind of consumers that you are expecting? Is it going to be a tier 1 market play or a tier 2 market play? A lot of these things have to come together in a standalone B2C player. So yeah, just putting a P&L hat on top of the whole marketing approach.
A lot of times people confuse marketing with heavy spends. It's not. It's about being smart. It's not about the amount of money you're spending, but about the biggest bang for the buck. So if I put this money and I have 10 options, I'm going to pick the option that's probably going to, at the lowest in terms of investment, give me the highest return, right? So that dynamic, it's a simple 2x2 grid, right? High cost, high impact, low cost, low impact. And you finally pick the low cost, high impact bucket and only invest in that. Now, this helps with anything that you want to work on. So think of all of the ideas, separate them by the simple 2x2 grid and put them. And then if you are looking at low cost, high impact, then just pick the ones in that bucket and invest in those.
Exactly. Great. So let's move to the next question. Next question is actually very similar to what we were just talking about. So I'm going to skip and move to the next question by Saurav Goswami. Does cold calling work anymore? Very interesting. I think we'll have a lot of perspectives here. Does cold calling work anymore? By Saurav Goswami.
You realize cold calling doesn't exist in today's world in the traditional sense of it, because somewhere somebody has seen you. Somewhere somebody has experienced or seen your brand or is familiar with it, because you realize that while there is so much clutter, there's also somewhere a recognition in the brain that sparks off and they say, hey, it seems familiar. You will never say, oh, really? I don't know this brand at all. I mean, that's a smaller segment.
I would highly disagree. The number of people I have to introduce myself to. But as a starting business, I'm talking about a very small scale.
Yeah, but Meghna, but you're not going to cold call, right?
No,
tell me,
actually,
model, would you call somebody?
We would, and we will continue to, because I don't know if cold calling in the sense just dial a random number, but I have sent hundreds and thousands of LinkedIn requests, hoping that one of them will convert, and they actually do convert. They might take a long time. So I had one customer who somehow, when they needed a celebration, and I'm talking about all of B2B sales through LinkedIn, where we don't have those connections because we worked in the corporate world for a long time. It's just whatever we have on LinkedIn. And so because of that, I sent a number of requests. Maybe out of 100, 5 may say, hey, okay, send us your catalog, whatever. But one will say, and that has happened to us, that okay, we have a celebration and the last Friday of every month we need 400 pieces of this. So for the next 6 months we actually catered to that and made a good amount of money. And I would say that's a good return on my investment of hundreds and thousands of LinkedIn requests.
So LinkedIn requests are not your traditional cold calling. I'm talking about the old world traditional cold call, which we all get, by the way. We still do, right? Banks will call you asking you. Have you as a consumer ever responded to that positively? You wouldn't, right?
Yeah.
Statistics
show but I've done it with HRs and all. Like, I'm damn irritating like that.
But that's not the point. You're connected with them somewhere. So they recognize you. You've connected with them either on a LinkedIn, or you've sent them an email, or you've started a conversation somewhere. So that's not your first point of contact. If it's a cold call, hi, I'm calling from so-and-so, and this is what I do. More often than not, and research also shows that, if you have done a LinkedIn connect, you have a context. So even if you pick up the phone, you say, hey, I connected with you on LinkedIn and I follow you. So a traditional cold call is, I don't even know who's on the other side. I just picked up a number, randomly dialed it, gotten access to. So whereas what model you're using, which is to either send an email or to have already connected with somebody on LinkedIn or to have built that connection through a social media platform, always works better because there's reference to context. You have something to connect it to. And if somebody calls and says, I have sent you, I follow you on LinkedIn. So when there is that, it is not a cold call. So your first point of contact has happened before you connect with that person.
Right.
So yes, that's a great model for.
No cold call for me. No cold calls. Only hot calls.
Hotline. Yes, hotline.
Hot calls. I mean, I don't even call people I don't know.
Cold call it also.
Usually the model is, people who want me will reach out to me. That has been my model, and I know it's not a strong business model, but that's how I started. When I started, I had decided that abhi maine kar liya, I've registered myself. Now we'll wait and see who wants me. So the approach has always been like that, and I can't complain too much because a lot of people do call, and they call because they know about the body of the work that has followed. So I never do a cold call. Never.
I'll just mention one thing here, and in the interest of time, then we'll move to the next question. It depends on which industry or who your target segment is. If you get a call from someone who says, "Madam, credit card chahiye," the first thing you do is, "Thank you, keep this." Now think of the other TG. Think of a Lalamove, for example, calling up to get delivery partners on board. Yeah. These are people who are going to get their earning out of it. They will be far more receptive, and in fact, data does show that the likes of Uber and Lalamove have had fair bit of, or at least more success than a credit card would have in getting their leads on the delivery partner side through cold calls. So the three things which I think, not for the second one, but for the first one, if you really want to have an effective cold calling machine, is one, you have to get the script right. Getting the script right is paramount. Having the right amount of information. Do not start with the promotion or the discount. Sign off with the promotion. Hey, by the way, if you right now buy, this is what you get also on it. The second thing is training your customer center executives. Again, as important as the first one. They need to be warm. They need to be affable. They do not need to sound very salesy, for the lack of a better word. And finally, three, again, the same old one, do not spray and pray. Figure out where you get the maximum bang for buck. Who are these people who are more likely to convert if you are cold calling them?
Yeah. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm just wondering if I pick up the phone random school and say, "Look, dude, I would like to change your school and your teachers. Would you be interested?"
No, but I think like Shravani said, data has to drive those cold calls. Again, the reason I would not call that a cold call is because if I know who I'm calling, I know exactly what kind of a pitch will interest that person. So Sandhya, if you know who that person is and if you've done your filtering and you've watched your data and you know and you mined the data well, then the cold call makes sense. Again, your first point of contact was at the data table, right? So you have made that connection with that data point as that person, and then you know how to curate that conversation. A lot of times, Shravani, you're so right. People are not able to articulate what you have in your head, and the reason I say that business owners should do first cold call as an example.
I agree. That I agree. I mean, whenever I have to talk to people, I am the person who talks to people.
Exactly. So
and that's what gets them on board. There is no debate over it. No debate.
Yes. Yeah.
Guys, in the interest of time, what we're going to do is, with the remaining questions that are pouring in, let's have some fun. Let's do a rapid fire.
Sure.
So I'm going to read the questions and I'll ask someone to, or whosoever feels like going for it, please do that. How does that sound? All in?
Sure.
You can all go. Tuck, tuck, tuck.
Tuck, tuck, tuck. Okay. Fastest finger first. All right. The next question is, what's the basic capital required or needed to start a business at a very small MVP scale?
Zero.
Depends on the type of business.
I was going to say ideas, passion, commitment, and the drive to get it done.
I think money. See, the reason I said zero is I'm a zero investment company. I started with ideas, and I, work from there. I didn't even know that we could, call investors. I didn't know it. So I just
don't start with the investment. Start with the idea. The investment will follow.
Absolutely.
So,
of course, the investment has to follow. So I'll come to you guys,
Purely from a capital or a financial standpoint, let's say maybe when you were setting up, I'm not sure if you are funded or bootstrapped. In either case, what is that basic minimum that you needed? And that gives people a good idea about
Self-funded, no investment from anywhere, a little help from my parents. But I would agree to Shreya and Sandhya in the sense that when I started, I sold a cupcake for 20 rupees. And then I saved money, bought an oven for 5,000 rupees. And then I sold a few more cakes, blah. Then bought an oven for 50,000 rupees.
That's
right?
exactly what I did.
So that's how, I mean, if you want it, you'll get it. You just start like that.
Then I think we have to start approaching people.
Next question again for Meghna. Can you please tell us how to start a business if you have no one to partner with? And Dipanjana has asked this question.
You don't need somebody to partner with. That's not necessary.
I agree. Do it alone.
Yeah, you can. There's nothing that you can't do. If you believe that that's the philosophy, then you can do anything. I've done deliveries. I've done jhadu pocha. I've made the cake. I've done everything.
True. Very true. Very true.
So,
You
yeah.
still do it. Still do it.
If you watch Shark Tank, that's the sharks that are there. They get starry-eyed and oh so happy the moment a co-founder comes in and says that, hey, I made this product in my garage. I did everything. I put in all that I have. They get so starry-eyed. So I'm getting similar vibes from Meghna right now.
One day on Shark Tank.
I hope you have enough runway and capital and everything. The revenue is pouring in that you don't even have to go to Shark Tank.
Thank you.
Yeah,
God
absolutely.
willing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, next question is for Sandhya because I know she might have a very interesting take on this.
Okay.
How and where do you find the right packaging materials for all the products?
I don't know. I mean, see, for me, packaging is how to package an idea, because I have not packaged a product, ever. But it's about whether you're talking about your product. It is still, remember, it's an idea. So even before the physical thing, you need to know how are you going to talk about it. What is driving that product or that service? So for me personally, I feel when I package it with my conviction, when I package it with passion, and when I package it with truth, that integrity, that honesty, that I'm here to change, and what I'm offering is indeed life-changing for somebody. It could be anything. And that is how, for example, I tell my teachers, you're a salesman. If you're teaching history, you have to sell history. Now, how do you sell history? You make people believe that without history, you're nobody. So how I think the packaging should begin in the head, like in terms of what are the feelings you're going to package it, and the other things are will follow. For example, if you're a green person, if you love your environment, then you will think twice about using plastic, for example. Or I have seen organizations and things that beautifully use what do you call it, environmentally safe materials to package. But technicalities, I think other people are more qualified to answer. But I think the first point of your presentation should be where does it come from? Where is that product born? What is that product born out of? What is that idea born from? So, yeah. Once that is clear, I think the rest just follows. It's just the technicality.
So this question was for Sandhya, and the asker was also Sandhya.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks, Sandhya.
Next question is for Shreya. When you're a one-person army, is there something like a work-life balance?
Oh.
So I don't believe in the concept of work-life balance. I think work is a part of your life. You can't, you can't say work is separate and life is separate. Yeah. I don't think anybody right now who's speaking differentiates the two. They are as integrated. Sometimes work needs you more, sometimes life needs you more. It's just about balancing that and prioritizing what is needing your attention at that point in time. Because I don't believe I believe in integration seamlessly, because sometimes I wake up with my laptop and phone, go to sleep that way. So that's how it is.
I completely agree with Shreya, and I feel, that I can't live life dichotomy. There can't be dichotomy in your own life. And for me, work and play is the same. It's just same. Work is life is work.
So one thing that's connecting all of us when we say that there's no dichotomy over here is the fact that all of you are very passionate about what you're doing, and hence there is no boundary between work
Yeah.
and life. And I think that's why you're
See,
able to do this.
yeah. See, there's another thing. There is also this concept of balance, and what I keep telling people is, if you are on a path to do something great, the first thing that goes out of the window is balance. You cannot have, you can't say, oh, I want to, change the world, but I want to make sure that my family is also taken care of, that I get my vacation, that I get my, not happening, dude. When you are on the path of doing something groundbreaking, then remember the one thing that you have to let go of is all the ordinary things that people do. You have to let go of it. You have to just understand that this is your vacation, this is your life, this is, and in between good things happen, that's bonus. Like if you get to spend some good time with your family, if you get to spend, go on a vacation, all that is bonus. You just have to count your blessings when you have them. But this itself is a blessing, and not many people are privileged. Not everybody gets an opportunity to do life-changing work, or some work that will actually create a dent in the thinking or in the society. So I just love imbalance and imperfection. I love it. I love it. I love it.
No, but the one thing I'll say over here for any founder or budding entrepreneur is that the first, when you start out, it is a very lonely journey, and yes, it is a one-person.
Totally.
Um,
Totally.
but one thing, not just me, a lot of my mentors who are now starting out their own also, what we seriously feel is that to be able to reap better benefits in future and have more streamlined functions, go and hire a chief of staff. Go and hire someone who is going to head your HR, so that the rest of the things fall in place. You can still be that one person army, but you are laying the foundation
Yeah,
for a
absolutely.
bigger and better organization of yours in the future.
Yeah.
Because you cannot be everywhere every single day once scale happens. So that's
So
one
that's
thing.
why you invest really good time in building your second in line, because you need that option to actually have an advisory board where you can bounce off your ideas, and where you can sort of build that in.
Great. So moving to the next question, it's by Jayanti Sinha. In the current situation of COVID, how can a company, especially a startup, make permanent and long-term customers, as there are bound to be delays on the product side or some other things because of the pandemic? I'll take this question. I think right now, given everything is on a standstill, and you might, as you were discussing, you might not be an essential service that's just getting sold off the rack. What you should do right now to build those is focus really, really hard on customer relationships. Now, these customer relationships, again, it might be just letting them know why your product is awesome, so that when they do have the budget or the kitty to put money in for this particular solution that they will need in future, you are the first name that pops up. You can do a lot of other things. Give them access to a freemium or a free for trial model of your product. Even if it is an MVP, let them have a taste of what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to give to them. It could be a limited, your freemium could be in the form of limited capacity or limited usage or limited features or a combination of all. But what it's doing is that it's making people curious. B, it's building better customer relations. C, while right now you might not have that pipeline, or rather immediate revenue actualization, what it's doing is that maybe a quarter, maybe 2 quarters down the line, you will be the person of choice. Your business will be the person of choice or the business of choice. That's
If
what
customers like you, they are very forgiving.
Hmm?
If customers like you, they are very forgiving.
Yes, that is very true. Okay, so we are on to our last few questions. The next question is for, let's have it for Meghna. How do you know that your chosen path or career will be financially rewarding? This is by Trisha Ramesh.
So I actually worked in the food industry a little bit before I started on my own, so I could see how people do it, what I should not be doing. I mean, there's no other way to learn apart from doing it on your own, but there's still a little bit of a peak that you can get to the reality. And so I knew from the very start that I'm not going to be a home bakery business and just sustain for myself. I knew that this is just a means to an end. I know how to bake until I can afford to hire somebody who can do it. So there was just never any doubt. I never thought that I will not be able to make money, or even if, but then there's also a lot of luck and privilege, like Sandhya said. I'm not in a position where I have to contribute or pay rent. I'm lucky that I live with my parents. And if you are in a situation like that, there's no reason why you should not take advantage of it and work as hard as you can to build what you need to, until you're in a position where you have to financially contribute and you can also reap the benefits of what you did all those years.
Yeah. Also, I think one angle to it is, and probably a little philosophical, that you won't really know, things. Like you won't know whether it's going to be financially available, whether you'll become a millionaire, or whether you'll be, have enough to run your life. You won't know it, but I think you have to put some faith
Yeah.
in, it is also that it will work. It
Yeah.
will work for me. It will get me by difficult times. These are the belief, at least, and I'm just speaking out of personal. I'm very sure that you need money, you need capital, and you need to really understand that you can't be doing things only for service. That money is a big part of everything. It's necessary, but you can't begin that way. When you
And
begin, you
a
have to
lot
say,
of
think of
entrepreneurs are not accidental
quality.
entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Very driven. They're driven by passion and focus. It's not, they didn't
Yeah.
accidentally stumble on it.
No.
So, they put in everything that they have. And remember this, as an entrepreneur, you will fail 9 out of 10 times. It's going to take you the 10th time to actually crack it.
I think failure is a bigger friend of mine than success.
Exactly. Which you don't hear much about, right? But it's true.
Yeah.
You will fail. And that's the reality. You will fail more than you did. That's also the reality.
And I think that failure is also an investment.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is an important learning, and it takes you places. Success won't take you the kind of places failure takes you. It is very important to understand the dynamics of failure as well. It's okay. You begin, start. Don't keep thinking whether it is going to be financially. Then you'll never begin.
Yeah. Just start.
You just have to jump. You
Yeah.
just have to jump.
For me, I think the biggest way or the best way for me to know that what I've chosen is right, and I'll come to the financial part soon, is that if I get up every day and I am as excited about the day as I was on the first day, I
Totally.
Yeah, I have that, so I have this thing called JFDI, where it's just beat, do it. It's a very Silicon Valley term. So if I feel that JFDI in me every single day, I know that A, yes, I'm on the right track. B, it doesn't matter whether or not it's financially rewarding right now. I know that I am going to, because of my passion, I am going to be
enjoy it. Yeah,
absolutely. Make it financially rewarding at the end.
Yeah.
That's just works.
It will follow. Things will follow.
Guys, we are past 5:30, and hence we will have one last question. So the way we do it is we'll take let's go one by one, and let's all put our thoughts, and then unfortunately, as lovely as this has been, we'll have to, or as the organizers are going to come running after us. So this question is by Disha, and the question is how to go digital with intense competition. Who wants to start?
Not me.
I think I'll go. See, the thing is, when you look at organic growth and when you look at brands that have cracked the content really well without really having to put money into it, you will realize what they have cracked is that sweet spot where the content meets somewhere in the periphery of the business. The business is never the focus, right? Because you're trying to look at the universe of where your business is and you're trying to make those connections around all of that and have a social impact angle to it. So when you're going digital with anything that you have and you want to crack it in an organic form, I think the most important thing is authenticity and purpose.
I agree.
If you don't have the authenticity and the purpose, plus if you have that and you don't have great communication skills, you'll still fail. You need to have authenticity and purpose mixed with communication skills and articulation, packaged just right, and also know the technology and the nuances with which things work and platforms work. Then you can crack that. But if you're only going to take elements of each of these buckets and try and play with them, it perhaps won't be as crack-a-lackin as you'd like it to be.
You know, that gave me a thought. One of the things I did was, especially when it came to COVID times and education, related businesses, that, Facebook page was crowded with, training from here, training from them. And I said, okay, I'm going to wait until all this dies down. When people are tired of seeing this content and seeing that, let people try everything they need to. So I waited for a period of time, say about 4 to 5 weeks or 6 weeks, I waited. And when I saw that, okay, now the interest is diminishing, now I'll put my content. I'll present it. You won't believe the number of teachers that find out. So the point is, don't put your content where there is already an excess of it, from competitors. So one is keep yourself, in that sense, you need to be above competition and you have to keep yourself outside the competition, so that already know that your content is right, and you wait for the right time, look for the right channels and put it. So again, it all depends on what is it that your end goal is, whether you want an X amount of money or you want the right kind of people to do your course, So it is let's say a tug of war between these two things. So for me, that worked, and well, I can't say that it was like spectacularly successful, but it was successful by my standards. So I thought it was a good way to look at the digital content and the digital marketing space.
In the baking space, I think that there are multiple ways of answering this, but I just take an example. During COVID, like Sandhya said, it was over flooded with so much free content. Actually, all the celebrity chefs, all the bakeries were suddenly putting out free recipes every day. Everyone is putting something or the other. And suddenly we're feeling, so much FOMO, like, oh my God, are we supposed to be doing something? And then I said, okay, I really don't have an unlimited number of recipes to put out. So I'm going to put a value to this and say, okay, if you want to join, then you join a workshop and bake along with me. So it's not like a YouTube video that you just watch and you get some knowledge. But if you need ingredients, I'll send you ingredients also. Buy the ingredients from me in the lockdown if you don't have access, but bake along. Because they were just doing a demo class. And so in that way, we were able to create digital content which was more engaging. Initially, I said, who's going to join this, because everyone's doing it for free. But I was surprised to see that first some auntie in my apartment said, Meghna, you have to teach me how to bake. So I did it for her. And then when we started advertising for it, we had a weekend where we had 15-20 people sign up and, just bake along with me on Zoom, and everybody showing me their cupcakes and the camera. And it was just so much fun. So yeah, that's how we did it.
Yeah, people like me who have no clue on how to bake, watching a video will obviously need assistance. Yeah. And this is a more normal demographic than the ones that can bake anything,
Yeah. I'll side with you, Shreya. They make Maggie that tastes half decent. I'm overjoyed.
मेरा तो वीडियो भी काम नहीं करेगा. I am such a dud in cooking that nothing will help.
Meghna just send the cupcake.
I had to go to Meghna, stand near her, and then learn. That's the only way I can do it. So.
Or we can get the cupcakes. I'm okay to do that also.
Done. I'm sending all of you cupcakes after this call.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you.
I just put, you guys have covered almost all the aspects here. especially from the power of content side and the right timing point of view. I'll just add the other bits, the side bits which are there to the digital side. Going digital, in my opinion, is it's yes, your customers seeing you as digital. B, it's you internally transforming into digital. Now, when you say going digital, it's A, your marketing goes digital. B, your distribution has to be digitally enabled. C, your organization needs to start thinking digitally. Now, what do all of these mean? Now, one, when I say marketing going digital is what you guys have brilliantly put forward. How do you put the name of your brand without actually putting it in what you're trying to communicate? For example, I was a part of this. I'm not sure if you guys have heard this. Mad Over Marketing, really, really famous group
Yeah.
about marketing.
Yeah,
They
absolutely.
keep doing these workshops, and one thing that they keep harping on is that don't talk about your product. Talk about what consuming that product is going to do to people. Talk about what you're going
Exactly.
to feel like. Talk about the positive impact of that product. So it should not be, let's say, if
Exactly.
I won't talk about, hey, go grab a Pepsi. I don't want to talk about what happens when you do grab a Pepsi. What do you feel like? For the lack of a better example. So that's one. Second is having the right distribution channels, especially in the likes of e-commerce and all. It is incredibly important, and supply chain has been one thing that has been the worst hit.
Yeah.
Or now at least things are bouncing back, but during the lockdown time, supply chain was the worst hit because state borders were closed.
Yeah.
I myself, I had shipments going which had to be stored, a lot of losses happening. So how do you digitize that front? There was this very interesting article that I was reading about how they are leveraging digital technologies in the form of tools and software. When I say software, I mean SaaS, to make your distribution or your fulfillment from JIT to JIC. It was a really good article that I read by one of my IC folks. JIT, basically, we've always visualized distribution in the form of something that's set in stone and it's happening. Then we started coming up with the whole concept of made to order, wherein the concept, the Japanese concept of JIT, just in time, started coming in. But now with COVID and so many irregularities and uncertainties, what's coming up is JIC, which is just in case. So you need to be very prepared, and there are a lot of these fulfillment startups that have started coming up, which are helping democratize this whole logistics. You don't have to wait for a lot of MOQ to really send your shipment across, and they are using data, they are using technology, and along with that, the actual physical stuff on the ground. So that's the second aspect. How do you build your distribution channels in the world of data? The third is how do you build your organization? Which is that when you're thinking digital, it's not just about putting content or putting, let's say, a video of, or let's say putting a digital product on online or on the app. It is also about seeing how the customer is behaving or reacting to it. What does your funnel, your conversion funnel look like? Where are they dropping? It is very important for the entire organization to start thinking in that manner for you to truly go digital. So that's my take on when there's intense competition, go all in on all three sides. Some outcomes will come. I'm not sure how,
Yeah.
something will come.
Always something will come.
Yeah. And guys, I just wanted to leave one thing for our viewers, that what we're discussing are things that we have seen in our experience. We've seen work with other folks that we've known. We have known these as best practices, and hence we'd love to, and which is why we are bringing all these out to everyone. Now, when you are starting out, when you are a small or medium business operator, while these might or might not work, because no one knows at the end of the day what the next, I mean, Bill Gates will not be able to tell you when the COVID impact in India would finally get over. But if you are that person, knowing those things that have worked for others will really help you get there, will really make it a less lonely journey, and will get you the results faster with a better probability of that happening. That's what I wanted to conclude.
Yeah, I mean, I can so relate to what you're saying, because that's what I'm trying to do. Get people together, talk about things and share. I think that's important. Thank you.
So I guess this is it. Or guys, any last words? Meghna, Shreya, Sandhya?
Hang on there. Believe in what you do, and you'll get wherever you want to get.
Captain.
I think all of us agree with each other, especially on believe in what you do, find your purpose. Just find something. Like, we make cakes and thousands of people make cakes, but we still believe that we're celebrating life. And if you see it like that, like we made a cake for a patient who recovered from cancer, and I shared that story with our team, and it changes your perspective. It's not just about baking anymore.
Yeah.
And if you think of it like that, you can go on and on.
So
I
I
feel
keep
like
saying
saying,
this, right? If you want market really well, take the science of data and marketing and merge it and blend it like you would blend a cake with the art of communication. Then you will bake it to perfection in that oven that it needs to go into, which could be your platform. And then your consumer will enjoy that at the end of it.
I'll just sign off by saying that I think even if you wake me up while I'm deep in sleep, I might as well get up just shouting data, customer centricity. Those things are so ingrained in how I think or what I believe in. Stay true to those. Leverage data. Stay true to your customers. I mean, Jeff Bezos built the entire Amazon on that principle. So I think we all can get some bite of it. So yeah, guys, thank you so much. Thank you for being
Thank you. Thank you.
and
Thank
it
you,
was
Gracious.
lovely talking to three of you.
Yeah,
And
lovely. Absolutely. I'm so glad I made three
Absolutely
new
amazing. I
friends.
know it was like a living room chat, you know, like four friends sitting and talking.
yeah,
That was the best part about it. Thank you, Brandcom. I hope we did
Yeah,
justice to
thank
what
you.
you had
Thank
in
you.
mind.
Yeah, I know. Especially with me on this. I mean, what? What was he even thinking? That's what I was thinking. But
So
it was great. Thank you.
thanks, viewers. We hope you have a great Friday night and a great weekend ahead. Stay safe, stay home, social distancing for the win. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, guys. Bye.